liberal the media is generally very liberal. So, well, not very, but generally liberal. Very liberal would be like MSNBC.
Right.
So I just think it's a matter of they're not. I mean, the conservatives that are out there in the media are treating Obama exactly how Bush was treated
By the left.
by the left. Yes. However, I think it's just interesting because the reason you notice more is because there are more left people on television. Because I mean that tends to be like in the creative world as well. Because like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, folks like that, although they hit Obama, they go after Obama too. And The Daily Show, I think, is much better at it than the Colbert Report, because the Colbert Report is very, very, very biased. And I just don't think it's that different once the enemies are there. But I mean, so much of the media is so kind to Obama.
So
still.
Basically what you're saying is that the treatment of him is different, but the coverage of things are different, not just because of bias, but because there are far more center left than center right, or in the case of Fox, extreme right organizations.
Oh yeah, I think so.
And then the ones that are extreme right, like Fox, just stick out extra because they're so starkly different, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'd say though, I mean, if you're reading the newspapers, Obama's treated a lot differently because there are more and more conservative newspapers. That's actually grown quite a bit in the past few years. But the New York Times and things like that used to punish Bush by not necessarily not reporting a story, but they would push a positive story about him to the back pages of the paper and a negative one to the front. That was both. I mean, you have to remember it's a business, and the public hated Bush, so there was something negative, they probably picked it up. Mm-hmm. Something positive, they probably weren't going to necessarily buy their paper that day.
Yeah.
So part of that was just sales.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, as is obvious in Washington, anything that happens is going to have one side angry and the other side's either going to be happy or not talk about it. So the Republicans in Washington are pretty upset about this. They feel like it is a blatant media bias, not just in certain segments, but as the whole media is treating him unfairly. And they've joked about starting a website, ifbushhaddonethat.com. Do you think that the right is justified? Are the conservatives justified in their anger with the way the media has treated them differently?
Oh yeah, I think they're justified, but that's politics. There's nothing in any kind of government document or anything like that says that the media has to treat each side different, like the same or anything like that, because that's the point of our media. The point is that they're completely independent. So I think they're justified, but there's also general feeling around the president still, because he's new, that you got to give him time to do the work. We gave Bush time. I mean, you got to remember that Bush had a lot of time. He was positive. There was positive news about him until 2004, until Iraq really went bad. And then, I mean, for instance, one of the things that you listed here, or that at least Politico lists, is that he does a 4-hour stop in New Orleans. But he did that stop on the way to a fundraiser. Now, Bush kind of, I mean, you have to remember how upset everyone was about the government reaction to Katrina, because they came at them. So, I mean, the government didn't move. There was I can't remember his name. The guy that was in charge of FEMA, who had ran a horse stable before
completely
that.
Underqualified.
Yeah, completely unqualified. And they really related, there was that picture. I'm not even sure if the picture was actually of him looking at New Orleans, but it became the symbol of this, of him looking out his plane window down on New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And so I think he really took that photo, hurt him a lot, and stuff like that. So I think it was just it was especially concentrated on him because the government reacted badly. And when this big government that's really abstract does something poorly, the president takes the brunt of all the anger. So I think that one made sense. And you have to remember, Bush came before Obama. So anything Obama does that Bush didn't do, very positive.
So is it just because Obama really hasn't faced those big hot button disaster issues like Bush and like? Well,
he hasn't had a chance to screw up yet. I mean,
it's a pretty cynical view, but that's how our society is anymore.
Well, that's what I think it is. I think that he hasn't. I mean, the healthcare thing could go that route. Afghanistan could go that route. I mean, I said this in an earlier episode, but Frontline already has a documentary coming out called Obama's War. He's already getting things branded to him. And so, like we do with all presidents, we eventually don't care for them very much. I mean, it depends on how well they spin themselves when they're out of office, because you have like Ronald Reagan. People still love him. So we'll see what happens. But I would say he just hasn't been there long enough.
Okay. You mentioned earlier how the media is a business, and one part of business is knowing your consumers and what they want to read.
Yeah.
Right? So is that part of it? Is that the reason that some of these newspapers and some of these, TV shows and networks are leaning a little more left, is because that's who they're appealing to? Or is that the people that's in the organization trying to change the people's view? Which came, it's like a chicken or egg. Which came first, the left people or the left media?
I would say,
and I'm not meaning like extreme left, I'm talking like central left or even center media.
Well, when it comes to news, I would say that the left people came first. And they're still very excited about the Obama administration. And because I know in the case of a lot of people accuse NBC News of being incredibly biased. MSNBC is way left field.
They're the Fox News of the left.
Yes, I was going to say. But the actual network of NBC, I would argue otherwise. And I know because I've seen how they structure their editing system. And they have very conservative editors, and then they have very liberal editors. And they have people there to look at everything and be like, no, you can't do this. It's too biased. This direction is too biased. That direction. So I think that a lot of the time it's just he's doing positive things. He's a lot to clean up. So he's doing positive things. And so news can be positive about him until, like I said, he screws up. He has to, for there to be negative news, he has to screw up. Otherwise, it's conservatives just making things up. A lot of the time. Some of their stuff I completely agree with. But
okay. Well,
I would say he just hasn't screwed up.
The reason I ask that is because if you pay attention to some of the, warning signs that are going through the American media, and like if you look at who they're giving to, who their audience is, there's been a fairly sharp change in their opinion of the president. There's a poll out that they showed his numbers in November 2008 after he was elected, and now, and there were questions like, how optimistic are you about this president? What's the biggest issue? And things have changed in the media and the set of not the media, but the citizens of the United States and the audience of these news networks are changing to kind of, well, what are you going to do? And another great example is the Saturday Night Live sketch where, the famous, what have I done? No, he hasn't done anything.
Yeah.
So is this going to cause a change in the way the media covers him, or are people going to start looking for alternatives to media sources, or what do you?
Well, you're starting to see. I don't think people are going to look for alternatives. I don't think that'll really change too much, because the staples are the staples. You're going to have the major news networks, and you're going to have the cable networks, and then whatever you read online, that kind of stuff. But I would just say that he will. I've noticed that too. His support is starting to wane everywhere, and you're really starting to see. I'm actually seeing more and more stories popping up that see him in a bit more negative light, and it's not necessarily what he's trying to do is negative, because it's not the same as because with the Bush administration, it was more about what he was doing, his decisions, and things like that. But with the Obama administration, it seems to be the inability for him to actually get things done. And that's very traditional of senators, because he was a senator, and senators are traditionally terrible leaders. And even you could go back to JFK. Now, JFK, once again, another very good orator, very good speaker, could really motivate the country. What did he do? Exactly. Now, the Cuban Missile Crisis, yes, but that came to him. Thank God he listened to his brother. Thank God he made the right decisions there. But in terms of legislation, it was Lyndon Johnson who did civil rights. It was Lyndon Johnson who did things once Kennedy passed. So I think it's a traditional thing to have senator. I'm amazed he has Rahm Emanuel in that White House, and if something gets done, I'm actually going to give more credit to Rahm Emanuel, because that man is one of the most frightening people I've ever come upon in my life. So. Okay. That's just my opinion. I think when things turn for him, it's going to be because of his inability to do anything. He might be able to. He's a good talker. He might be able to talk his way out of it. So We'll see. Well,
I don't have anything else to ask you. Anything you want to add?
Not necessarily. I have nothing. No, I have nothing.
Okay. Well, like we said, this is a work in process. We're still trying to figure out what we want to call the title and how we're going to structure this. But if you guys have any questions, we'll happily take them, or any comments or suggestions. For any part of the show, but especially our new segment. And hopefully we can roll out some more new segments and parts of the show to give you guys a different aspect into who we are, what we care about, and maybe that'll give you a better sense
I mean,
of the show.
and a way to hear